So, Uglydolls. The animated film Uglydolls, based on the cute and simplistic little dolls that have weird little deformities. Now, naturally, these dolls, like they're called ugly dolls since they wouldn't be accepted, which means there's kind of like an accepted version of beauty. And it turns out that yeah, that's the case with this film, where it seems like the ugly dolls are kind of shunned by a more perfected society of dolls that desire that everything be perfect and just right. And if they're not right, then they have to be discarded. And so there's a very deep theme. There's a lot of deep themes here in this film about about acceptance and individuality, and a little bit of like like the fears of eugenics, where like if you're not born properly, we're like some people question if you're meant to live at all if you don't fit to a societal standard, which also touches on like when you consider what it means to be accepted and taken in as a toy of this environment, holds some like context of both like racism and with how it's societally accepted, and with spirituality in terms of how you would go on to like to the next level of your life, which these toys aspire to. They aspire to go out into the world. So there's all these different themes that play a very interesting role in this film, or at least it would have played an interesting role in this film if this film weren't so bland and tiresome. Without I had you going there, didn't I? Okay, so God, this film is so frustrating because it has so much potential to this type of story and squanders all of it, like nearly all of it at every turn here. Okay, so the central story is that I found myself being like kind of nitpicky with these questions just because everything else in this film was so boring. Okay, so apparently the premise is there's a factory that makes toys. We don't know much about the factory other than the fact that somehow this is where like the sentience of toys are born. You can think of it as like kind of the weird prequel to Toy Story if you want to think of it like that. So what happens is like if the toy is correct on the factory line, it goes off into this kind of like Institute of Perfection, something like that. And if it's not perfect, then it ends up going down this tube. And the tube leads to Uglyville, where all the ugly and misshaped toys go to. So cobbled together from, a bunch of like felt, these ugly characters live this kind of like bouncy and carefree life, except for Moxie, played by Kelly Clarkson. Moxie, actually still has kind of like this belief that there's still like like she still has a purpose as a toy. Like she can actually go out into the world. She will be one day accepted as a toy for a little girl or boy. And everyone else kind of like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. But then she's like, well, what if we go to that tube where all the rejected toys come from? What if I go up there? What will I find? And so she ventures through the tubes and ends up at the Institute of Perfection, where all the acceptable toys go to. And at this place, all the toys that are apparently accepted are just kind of these, very similar to the Ugly Dolls. They're very simplistic. They're very, thin, tall bodies with these very large heads. You can probably think of a number of different dolls that have this type of design, and they're like, now it's weird here. Like you kind of gotta follow this and not question too much, which again is hard because so much of this is bland. So apparently at the Institute, you're trained how to be a doll, apparently, and if you're acceptable enough, like if you meet all the requirements, you're allowed to pass through a portal that apparently. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I'm trying to piece this together as best I can. Okay, so apparently, if you're accepted, you go through the portal and you're kind of granted sentience into a toy. That's what I'm guessing here. That's what they set up here. Now, who determines how you're perfect? Well, there's a bunch of robots running around, so you think maybe there's some giant computer system controlling it. That's what I thought, at least. But you need a central villain. You can't just have like robots or some like god figure that they gotta fight. So you have the character of Lou, who's kind of like the most perfect doll ever. Lou is voiced by Nick Jonas, and he naturally, similar to Kelly Clarkson, he comes in with a song as well about desiring perfection and calling people ugly and how they're not acceptable. And so basically he kind of like teaches toys to be ready for the world, but at the same time also deciding who doesn't get to go over somehow, even though I think the robots are kind of in control of that. I don't know. You can't question too much, but like I said, there's so much blandness to it that you end up questioning. Even some of the characters end up questioning the world at one point. Towards the end of the film, one of the characters questions how time works in this toy world. Like, one character's like, how long did this take? Did this take over the course of like days or weeks or months? Like, I don't understand time here. How did this work? And it should be like a silly kind of like fourth wall breaking type joke, because there are a few of those here. But at the same time, you're kind of like, well, yeah, how much time did pass here? And who maintains the factory? Who makes up these rules? And like, how is like the sentience form? How does the portal work? The portal plays like a central role here, except I don't know. It's in kind of like this kind of weird, like kind of like Monsters Inc. type environment where it's kind of like between dimensions, sorta. I don't know. You question too much of this when at the same time, you know, the animated adventure and musical aspect is just so dry. Like, you have all these like characters who accompany Moxie on this adventure, and they're literally just like one joke. Like, you have Pitbull voicing Ugly Dog, and Ugly Dog's whole deal is that he's a DJ, so he likes to rap and he likes to dance, and he provides the soundtrack, and that's about it. That's about it. Wanda Sykes plays a chef with a kind of like "I told you so" attitude. She doesn't seem to cook much throughout the film. That doesn't really come into play so much. It kind of just feels like they hired Wanda Sykes to be Wanda Sykes, just, you know, questioning certain aspects of the film while kind of having this, well, I told you so nature to her. You have Wang Leehorn playing Lucky Bat, who is just kind of like the nerd. Like, he's just supposed to be insightful, but only for like certain scenes, then nothing else. And then you have Gabriel Iglesias, which Gabriel Iglesias, I think he encapsulates what's wrong with this film. Not so much for his character, but his character trait. His whole trait is he's this resourceful giant who has all these different vehicles and gadgets and devices in his pocket that he could use for any situation. But when he's called upon to use them, he sifts through all of them and ends up finding like nothing. Like, it's like, oh, how are we going to get up to this giant hole in the sky that we got to travel through to get to the Institute? Well, he unloads I think like a grappling hook or a car or like a helicopter, and says like, I got nothing. And I can't think of a better way to sum up the film than that. Here's a film that it could have touched on so many aspects. It could have touched on like better aspects of, like, you know, being societally acceptable, being, you know, comfortable with the skin you were born in, religious aspects, eugenics aspects that could be explored here. But then they're not explored. And the themes that are explored about, you know, having faith in yourself and all that are pushed off to the side in these kind of like really forced kind of like PSA type songs. And I get the feeling that a lot of these messages might actually be lost on some viewers. Like Lou's opening song about, you know, calling everyone ugly, it doesn't really sting as much by the end there as it should. It should feel like he's like a really sinister bad guy who deeply scars these characters, and it doesn't really feel like that. Moxie's opening song is all about, you know, how, like, you know, it can't get better than this in her town. Except it's not better, because like she's desiring more. See, like, you don't really get that sense of like curiosity from her. It just kind of feels like pushed to the back there. And then probably the most confusing part of the film is there's one character, Mandy, one of the perfect dolls, who hides in imperfection secretly because she fears extermination. She at one point decides like she's gonna help the ugly dolls by putting makeup on them and giving them a new look. And so she has this very, very cute and peppy song about, you know, wanting to get all dolled up. You know, isn't it great to get all dolled up? And I looked at this song and like, this seems really, between the other two songs, this seems really conflicting with like the message of the film. And then by the end of the song, they have that one moment where the lights go dim, everyone's out of the room, the spotlight comes on, she looks in the mirror and she's not comfortable, you know, with the, you know, getting all dolled up and stuff like that. So it kind of just feels like they want to have all these like big and bouncy musical numbers, but then when it actually comes to making a point and actually, you know, focusing on like a theme and a message, it just kind of feels like you know how like the 1980s cartoons would kind of like force in like the PSAs at the last minute there. It feels like all that is just pushed to the side. And I would have been okay with that, but the music is just forgettable. The animation is so like bland. There's like a lot of the environments just kind of like blank in the background. And the humor is, like I said, like most of the characters are just one joke, and like most of the laughs, I didn't get any laughs out of this. And the most I did was kind of smile at some parts where they say like, "Oh, it seems like these characters are into literal naming." And I laughed at that joke once in like the 4 or 5 times it was used in this film. So, I want to, this film frustrates me because it has, like I said, it has all these great themes that you could focus on, that you could hone and make something very meaningful out of, but it's lost in all the crap that comes with just kind of phoning it in with these animated films. Like, there's tons of musical numbers that are original musical numbers, and none of them are that great. You have all these different animated characters and worlds, and it feels like there's no potential for comedy in them. You have all these different characters they throw at the screen, and they barely get to do anything that shows like that much personality or chemistry. So you feel this sort of emptiness where it's trying to push forth a good message, but everything else isn't there. Like, it's like comparable to like Toy Story. Toy Story, another film about, toys wanting to be desired and acceptable, and like, questioning, how, what is your placement in the world? Like, Toy Story did a great job focusing on that. And Uglydolls, unfortunately, just kind of phones it in. I mean, its heart's in the right place, but wow, is its presentation just all over the map that it's just, it's just such a disappointment. And I wish I could like the film more. I mean, like, kids will probably laugh at it. A lot of the kids at the screening were kind of digging the very basic kind of like childish humor. Will it appeal to them? Probably. But I get the feeling like the message is really going to be lost on them, especially for a lot of these musical numbers with very pushed in messages in the lyrics that are not very cleverly woven in. I get the feeling a lot of kids are just going to tune out to that. In fact, I could hear a lot of them like kind of like wincing and whimpering during those scenes that they didn't want to be there. So, oh God, I'm almost kind of more interested in Uglydolls for all the potential that it could have had, and just doesn't. And it's not on the screen there. So I'm conflicted, but you know what? Uglydolls, 2 out of 5 stars.